Strive and Thrive is a collection of discussions featuring guests from various fields, focused on guiding entrepreneurs in creating businesses that excel in every aspect: people, planet, and profit. Throughout the series, you can join us, Romesh and Mike, as we explore relevant topics with our guests which can help businesses thrive.
Romesh and I met while I was supporting a client transform their business. And I needed finance director support and reached out to him and his team. Since then, we've become good friends who share a passion for business and entrepreneurship. If you like today's discussion, then you want to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels. Hi everyone. Welcome to our new episode of Strive and Thrive. On today's episode, I would like to welcome David Jarman. David is an Associate Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Bristol. I've been working with Dave and his team for the last 5 years, working on various projects with his university students. It's been really interesting. I've learned about teams, innovation, entrepreneurship, such a fantastic discussions. I'm looking forward to today as we learn more about growing businesses, how to exploit technology from universities, what it takes to build a business, and all those interesting things that we often talk about on Strive and Thrive around entrepreneurship. So welcome, Dave. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Romesh.
Brilliant. Hi, Dave. And first, just say well done, Mike. You said the word entrepreneurship about 5 times there, and did pretty well.
We need to play bingo.
I mean, I have to introduce myself as a Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship on a way too regular basis, and it's
buzzword
too
bingo.
many words.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, that's a good listener, shall we say? So, yeah, Dave, welcome to the show. Please tell us about your career to date.
Thank you. Okay, how did I get to here? I did an undergraduate degree in English and Classics because I was just interested in them. You may hear the faint tremor of an Essex accent hidden here. I can't say the word free. I tend to say 1, 2, 3. That's about the only bit that gives it away. But I did a degree that I was really interested in, and in a sense that sets up some of what follows, because I went from there. I was a Students' Union sabbatical officer. I ran a radio station and a newspaper. I realised I wasn't done with academia, went to the University of Bristol, and have arguably never entirely left. That was about sort of 25 years ago, to do a master's degree in mythology, which we may well circle back to at some point. But as you can kind of tell, I was still doing the things that I was kind of really passionate about. I went from there to work for the Students' Union as a training officer. I went from there to the University of Bristol's Careers Service to do employability work based on skills development. I went from there to work in research commercialization for the University of Bristol, because the skills that we were helping people develop in employability were not wildly dissimilar to what we were trying to do in terms of supporting would-be entrepreneurs. And that was where I really kind of got deep into the sort of innovation and entrepreneurship space. I jumped ship for a couple of years, just after my daughter was born, to Bath Spa University, a creative arts university just down the road, and I was their head of careers and entrepreneurship for a couple of years. And then 9 years ago, I came back to the University of Bristol on the dark side to be an academic. And basically, I was one of the first team into the newly founded Centre for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and we've grown from about 40 students to over 400 students at the present time. I also continue to freelance and have done through most of that period. So I also work for an accelerator program that supports arts and social sciences academics to commercialize their research. How's that for a whirlwind?
Wow! I'm taking all of that in, but what a fabulous journey! And kind of loving the support of entrepreneurship and the entrepreneurship space, which is obviously what we're all about, and why I think you're going to be a fantastic guest today. So in a previous chat, Dave, you talked about being a lecturer in mythology, which I found fascinating. So very briefly, can you tell me just a tiny little bit about that? And also, you mentioned that there was a storytelling element of that, which kind of really informed and helped you as you moved, towards the world of entrepreneurship in terms of your involvement and guidance.
Yeah, the storytelling piece isn't one that I necessarily recognised at the time. So I basically did a master's in myth. So I wrote my dissertation about heroic behaviour at the fringe of society across Indo-Europe. So I was looking at kind of Viking, Greek, Celtic mythology, and what heroes did at the sort of edge of kind of what was sort of civilized behavior, which I did because I was fascinated by it. I've still got a huge love of ancient history. That's still one of my kind of real kind of passions. But I did that degree, which my father, who was a plumber from Essex, was like, "What are you doing a master's degree in? And are you expecting me to fund this?" I got a career development loan, amazingly, to do that. But actually, I still use it all the time because it's about storytelling. Mythology, it's often what we refer to as kind of aetiological. It explains things. So sometimes you've got mythology that sort of says this is why the sun's there and the moon's there and the grass is green and why the seasons happen. But you also have mythology that sort of explains what humans are allowed to do and not allowed to do. So one of the things that comes out of heroic mythology that's quite similar to entrepreneurship, in fact, there are people who've written some papers about this, is the idea that you can tell who's a god because they get away with whatever they want to. So if you think about Zeus, he does all kinds of crazy stuff that humans are not allowed to get away with. And you can tell he's a god because he always gets away. And humans, by and large, get punished for doing the things that gods are allowed to do. But heroes are often they're often a sort of like sun, or they're often sort of semi-divine, and they get away with things for a while. So characters like Heracles, but equally Viking heroes and Beowulf and what have you, they go out and they kill the monsters at the edge of society, and they do these incredible things. But when they come back to society, they're seen as kind of dangerous elements, and they sort of smash the place up. Like Heracles killed his wife and kids, and he threw his mates off some battlements, and Beowulf smashes up the hall when he's fighting the monster Grendel. And it's sort of pointing to the idea that there are these people who are allowed to go and do weird and different things, but they're still going to be weird and different even when they're at home. And there's something in here about who gets allowed to be an entrepreneur. Like, are they born? Are they semi-divine? Do they have it in the blood? Or do they get made? And is that entrepreneurial behavior always good when they're founding and starting radical companies? Or are there some negative bits to that as well, in that, we've all read lots of entrepreneurial biography, I'm sure, and some of them are horrible people on occasion. Like apparently, there's a story about how Steve Jobs always used to park his car across two bays in front of the Apple building, and he'd often park in the disabled bay. And it's this sort of it's the same behavior that allows him to do some things that makes him intolerable in other places. And I mean, I'm just going to say Elon Musk.
We talk about him a lot on these podcasts. He pops up on every other one at the moment, probably. I never thought we'd have a mythology lesson and integrate that into entrepreneurship. I never knew that was where we were going to. As you were talking, Dave, I was going to myself, how's he going to intersperse this with entrepreneurship?
That's the storytelling bit. That's the bit.
You've won me over.
Me too. It's fascinating.
And do you think, and I know we have talked about this, and I'm going to pick on something you've talked about, do you think there's this misconception of what entrepreneurship really is? And do you think some of that stems from some of the points you've really just made, that it's it's a persona that people believe is out there rather than actually the reality of what it is when you're working with individuals?
I think so. I think that the entrepreneurs that most people tend to see in their media feeds and talked about on telly are the super successful ones. And that sets up a kind of a false idea that all entrepreneurs are those incredibly driven, real forceful personalities one person against the world, kind of you just got to try hard enough and want it enough kind of stories. But actually, that's kind of disregarding, actually, when you meet most entrepreneurs, they're kind of not like that most of the time. And there's lots of people who are equally as driven and as forceful who don't make it. So in some ways, it's not even that is a particular strategy for success. But I think some of those images of the sort of, white, well-heeled, middle-aged man being, this is what entrepreneurship looks like, and you've got to have money and you've got to have drive and you've got to be a kind of weird, rare talent. Actually, I don't think it's helpful. I think it's putting more people off than it's bringing in.
And what do you see as signals of entrepreneurship and the right kind of behaviors and personalities, skills that have been successful with some of the sort of companies that you've been able to support and work with from Bristol and from your own experience in the incubators?
I think the thing that separates entrepreneurs from anyone else is they've had a go, and that actually they have found a way to tolerate a level of risk and ambiguity, and they've worked it out as they go. And in some ways, the secret to entrepreneurship is, I think, just trying. And you may find that you don't want to tolerate all of that risk and ambiguity, and you might want a more secure kind of career path. But equally, you might find that you're quite good at that, and that suits you. And then you will probably pivot your way through a range of opportunities until you find one that is actually successful. But I think the idea that you're just going to kind of come up with your genius idea by yourself and railroad it into that isn't what happens in almost any case. I'm trying to think even of a famous entrepreneur who was right first time. Like, most of them weren't. I mean, they're all pivots.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot on these podcasts around resilience and how the entrepreneur builds resilience. But the point I think you're making there is that comes with the journey more than it does actually the starting point. You have to realize resilience as part of it when you realize your idea isn't quite right, or the customer is gone, or the money is difficult, whatever the type is. But actually, kind of, you're saying just get going, get moving, and start something, get trying, manage the risk in your head and work with that balance, and then you can see what you learn as you part of where you go.
I think a lot of I see this in my students. I think partly some of them are put off entrepreneurship because it doesn't look like them, and that's like, I can't see myself in that, or they think it's as I said, you've got to be better heeled or more talented or more driven, and they kind of decide it's not for them. But equally, some of them find that process kind of uncomfortable, and that idea of sort of tolerating failure and learning from your mistakes and what have you, and they want something maybe a bit safer and a bit kind of more reassuring. But I genuinely think that entrepreneurship is something that we can all do. And I think the idea of using entrepreneurial skills and tools and mindsets is something that benefits all of us. And you can grow in confidence by going through this. So one of the secrets of our kind of degree program has always been that we give students multiple attempts to try something, fail in a safe space, get rewarded for what they've learned, and have another go. And I think the successes that we're seeing at the end of our program come from the fact that there are multiple failures that you can't see, but they've learned from, and that's been really powerful.
I was going to pick up on your TED talk that we picked on, and how people start, and I call it fractional entrepreneurship, and how people get started with small scale things, problems that they want to address, or ideas they want to exploit, or a customer they want to help, and how they do it in a fractional model. What's your view on how to help people get going on that trying journey?
So I talk in a lot of my classes about what we call kind of starting points, or there's a writer called Stephen Johnson who wrote a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And he in there's an analogy about what innovators actually do is they have a really good scrapyard of spare parts. And it's not that they've sort of magicked the answers out of thin air. It's just that they've been rooting around in a really interesting, diverse scrapyard. And they've put some bits together that no one else had thought to put together yet. and then they see if it's kind of valuable. And it links. So you mentioned my TED talk. So I did a TED talk about 8 years ago around part-time entrepreneurship, or sort of the idea of having a side project as a sort of part-time way of getting going. And ultimately, I think most entrepreneurs and most people benefit from trying to make something happen, even if it's at quite a small scale, but taking a passion, finding little spare parts of their own interests, of their own experiences that they've pulled out of their context, and having a go at trying to do something, and then deciding if you enjoy it, deciding if it needs to pivot to something that maybe you enjoy more or has any chance of getting you paid. But it's quite an iterative, organic process. But I think, again, to go back to where we started, I think people get very hung up that entrepreneurship has to be this sort of glorious endeavor based around a genius idea. And actually, it's really just tolerating a series of affordable failures and deciding that there's still something in there that you want to do and that you're passionate about.
So some of the things I think, and when I've been talking to a number of people, and recently we had Kim on the podcast, and she talks about how focus on the problem. She's got a passion for the problem, and she realized her solution wasn't the end game to the problem. The problem was the solution to her end game. And if she stayed on that journey, she realized eventually it would work out, and that's what's happened, because she keeps being curious, keep investigating, keep balancing that difference between money. And I think that links a little bit to the purpose. Find something you're motivated by, find something that you're passionate about. And if you go on that journey, you can withstand some of the challenges that you'll hit. It's slightly different to just homing in on an idea and going, come on everybody, grab hold of it, and why aren't you buying it off me?
I think down the years, I mean, I've seen a lot of student business plans. Like, I mean I probably get pitched in the hundreds every year and have been for 15 years. And you kind of, over time, the ones that I always would back myself are the ones where I can see that the student is just really passionate about whatever it is, either because it's a problem, or it's because they are into a technology, or they are just really geeky about something that the rest of us think is a bit obscure and a bit niche. Like, you know, I'll back the student who is just so into surfing in a way that feels a little bit worryingly myopic, that surfing is their whole life. But I will back those over the sort of student who comes in with 4 different get-rich-quick schemes, and then if pushed on any of them, goes, oh, you don't think it's as quick and as rich as I think it is? No, I mean, you might still make some money, but it isn't as quick or as rich, and they will put it down.
Whereas,
so you're looking for kind of narrow-minded drive and focus.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Mike was saying. It's a passion for something, not necessarily for the solution, because if they're so driven by the solution, that could be a problem, because they might be trying to flog something that just nobody else recognizes or wants. Whereas if they've got that understanding of something, you think that actually, if I back this person over a number of iterations, they will get to something that is genuinely insightful, because they found something that other people might kind of coalesce around in an interesting way. So sometimes the solution, the idea that they have that incredible solution, is a worry. But generally, if they are into something, I think that's a good sign that they will find something.
I love the balance you talk there, and it's something that that one of our previous guests, Kimberly Abbott, talked about, and Mike will smile at this, but it's one of our favourite phrases so far on Strive and Thrive, and that's fall in love with the problem, you know, not the solution, i.e. make sure that what you're solving for is relevant and is actually a scalable business proposition, right? So it's interesting that you're talking about, yes, you need that drive, you need that kind of focus, and almost kind of have the ability to kind of draw people towards your idea, but at the same time, it does have to be viable, right? So,
and that passion is also the bit that makes you resilient. So not only does it act as a magnet for other people, and it may be that passion also gives you access to a community of practice of other passionate people that might be your first audience, or it might be your first stakeholders, or the people that you can sell a minimum viable product to. But that passion is also the thing that's going to get you out of bed again when you've hit a speed bump. When you hit those moments of, I'm going to need some resilience to push through, negative feedback or a bit of ambiguity, or I'm going to have to, tighten the belt for a while to get to. It's that passion that's going to get you through. Whereas if you were just hoping that was going to make you rich quite quickly, you're probably putting that down the minute you hit any kind of speed bump.
Yeah.
So
it's buying into the people, isn't it? I know, Romesh, you and I talk about this when we're looking. You're more in the slightly later than Dave and I in the kind of maturity of businesses, but you still see when you're in that investment world that you're playing in is the people are the ones they invest in as much as the idea, right? And this is the same story at the early stage.
Absolutely. And I think it's so interesting that Dave has made that connection with passion for the service or the product, but also it's that passion that drives your resilience. I love that because, Mike, we talk about this quite a lot as well, the fact that you need resilience to keep going because it isn't linear. There's lots of hurdles and challenges, etc. And you've got to have something that just keeps you going, right? So I think that's really important. I would say that you need that balance though, because passion, if it's turned up too much, kind of blinds you to or can blind you to the reality of the scenario, right? And it's balance in all things, but those are key components, I think. And Dave, I can really hear that passion in your voice when you're talking about your accelerator program, your entrepreneurship support. So that's wonderful to hear.
Working with people who've got ideas is just so much fun, and I'm sure both of you kind of have this as well. That actually one of the things that gets me into work every day is I'm going to be pitched all kinds of crazy ideas by and large really kind of passionate students, and if I can kind of help them work out how to, because usually the ideas you hear they think are there and actually they're just to the left or they're just to the right and they just need to be reshaped or pivoted slightly, and then they're going to be spot on. And if I can play part of that role, I mean, that's really good fun. That's what gets me in every day.
And do you have areas you're interested in, Dave? Do you have topics, or are you open to the world of different ideas, different problems? Do you have things that hit your sweet spot of areas that really you fall in love with and want to really help?
That's a good question. There are definitely things where I switch off slightly, and that's if it's super technical, either kind of science, hardware, kind of financial structuring, legal stuff. I get a little bit lost in the jargon because I don't follow those subjects maybe personally anyway. So I can still be quite a useful coach in those circumstances, but if they're doing something that's more socially purposed, I am all over it because I buy into those social purposes by and large. If a student's pitching me, a law tech program that's going to save, high-end hedge funds a percentage a year, I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, fine. I'm sure you'll be successful, but okay. Whereas someone is pitching me a kind of, community venture that's going to solve a social or environmental problem, I mean, that is going to interest me that bit more.
Mike, you must be loving this because of all the people I know, you are someone who loves ideas, and to your point, Dave, Mike and I love doing this Strive and Thrive podcast because we are opening ourselves up to new ideas, and I think that is one of the real joys of this project. But Mike, tell us about your passion for new projects because you're all over this too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do slightly later stage stuff than you, Dave, in the sense of I like to hear people's strategy and ideas and pitches, but I like to help go on that journey of learning. And I think if I was to define myself, I'm more interested in the ethnography of understanding the problem that people are really trying to address. I'm doing a problem in policing at the moment where I'm working with police officers. I'm doing a project in sales and marketing, and I'm doing the sales. And like for me, I'm just so passionate about that kind of learning exercise. So when we do social projects, we're doing a project in Ecuador at the minute. I'm curious about what that looks like. We've done biodiversity projects. We've done a few really interesting ones with your university. And I think for me, that fuels my interest. And when that fuels my interest, I can kind of narrate through it to see where there's an opportunity for interesting business ideas, exploitation ideas, or just kind of something that might have impact.
Mm.
And I think that's the bit that motivates me. And I think I've learned the balance between social projects and entrepreneurship. No, I don't want to use that word again. And money making, being very blunt. And Romesh and I talk a lot about the balance here. And I think navigating that is where some of these social projects can be most powerful. And some of the people who lead these projects need to think about that very early on, that contradiction between sometimes your purpose and impact, biodiversity, or your interest in actually we've got to make money here, and that will have as bigger impact on biodiversity as your idea itself.
Actually, just build on that, and this is interesting because between the three of us, we're at different stages of a pipeline.
Yeah.
And at every stage in that pipeline, we probably all want to see passion, but we'd also all want to see some sort of proof of profitability, even if that's not enormous profitability. It's enough to wash your face and keep the thing going.
Almost.
Viability, right? Viability.
Yeah. I mean, at my earliest stage, in some ways, I would still want them to address the profitability question, because otherwise it's not got a future. But it's the passion for it and for solving the problem in an interesting way that's going to give them all of the early power that they need to get in front of someone like Mike. And then Mike's going to want a different balance. And I wonder, Romesh, at your stage where we might be kind of talking about the sort of scaling and the later investment rounds and what have you, is passion still a significant there? It'd be tempting to think that it's been de-risked enough that we're just talking about the profitability at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, Dave. It's a really good question. And to be honest, we come across businesses at all stages, really. We come across pre-revenue businesses, that are starting fundraising, all the way up to quite large SMEs, tens of millions of pounds of turnover. And but to address your point in scaling up, where you might have raised some money, and is it now a little bit more formal, a bit more straitjacketed? And I think the best outcomes are ones where the passion and drive of the entrepreneur is harnessed correctly and is partnered with structured thinking in a way that is mutually, beneficial, and therefore becomes very, very powerful, right? I think if one of those two elements is too strong, then you can knock things off balance, off kilter, and impact.
Your word structured there, I was going to kind of come back to that, because I can almost hear the sort of, is there a slight reservation about too much passion or unstructured passion from an entrepreneur at those stages? I mean, does the passionate entrepreneur become a liability at any point?
They can be. I mean, look, we have to be honest, right? I mean, a great entrepreneur is not necessarily a great CEO or managing director. And when your business gets to a certain point in its life cycle, the skill set need to evolve for the leader of that business. So the visionary, the entrepreneur, the person or people with that passion need to be there to get it off the ground, and they could well be there to keep it going all the way to the end, right? Or there may be a scenario where they kind of step aside to an extent, focus on their strengths, get someone in to kind of help with the more structured elements of running a business, because you do need I think. Sorry, Dave.
The maintenance. I think there's a difference between what it takes to start and what it takes to maintain and to grow. I wonder if they're sort of different they're certainly different skill sets, I think. I wonder if they're different personalities.
Yeah, they can be. But, it really does depend, I think, on individuals, right? Because different people have different capacities to learn, adapt, and progress. Some entrepreneurs can be incredibly passionate, but at the same time, when they're partnering with the right investors, with the right kind of support as they scale, it brings out the best in them in terms of their natural strengths, but also they're able to grow and learn and develop those skills, which enables them to be an effective all-round business leader. Other entrepreneurs don't have that, and then there's everything that lies in between, right? So I do think there's it does depend on the person or people and attitudes, and of course talent, right? You need that combination of talent and attitude, I think.
People need to be able to adapt, right? Because what we're really talking about between us three at different stages really is that they need to be able to adapt from starting with the trying and the purpose and the passion for something. My stage is kind of a little bit more hypothesis testing. They've got some assumptions and they've got to be open to channeling that, and that might be a hypothesis in a business case as much as a solution space and things like that. Whereas for you, Romesh, by that point they've got to be ready to go, I'm running something now. And people and for someone to go on that journey through these three phases, and this doesn't happen quickly, but they've got to be able to adapt to the needs of those situations, or at some point, and I've seen really good people recognize that they can do Dave's phase, my phase, but by the time they come to you, Romesh, that's not them. They're better off coming back towards mine and your phase, Dave. Look at something new, build something new within their business, and let others run it. But it's being open to that as for their own individual experience.
That openness is quite interesting. It goes back to what we were saying about kind of resilience, because in some ways, actually resilience isn't being completely rigid and like made of glass.
The opposite, right?
You've got to be flexible. You've got to be able to change. You've got to be able to recognize that circumstances have changed. You've got to recognize what you need to do in the context of those circumstances. And you've got to be vulnerable enough to go, and I've got to iterate. And it's not just the business that's going to iterate, it's me that's going to iterate. So actually, again, the passion for the problem is probably one of the things that pulls you through. Because if what you were invested in is just that solution, you're probably not going to change very readily.
Absolutely.
Because, it's this, isn't it? Whereas if you were passionate about the problem that solution seems to work against, but that solution now needs to iterate and change scale and work in different ways, you've got to be willing to go with it. It's a big ask.
It is. It's passion, it's adaptability, and actually what we're also talking about here is courage, isn't it? It's being able to take that risk. Because one of the things that strikes me in this conversation is, I've probably had the inverse relationship to you guys, in the sense that, I started off, qualifying as an accountant, FTSE 100 experience, then moving to the world of startup scale-ups and SMEs. And obviously my grounding has always been in, I suppose safety first, corporate structure, that kind of ethos and thinking. And as I develop on my journey, I'm learning the value of learning more about taking risks and being more commercial and getting the thinking that entrepreneurs have. And to be honest, 10 years ago I was a million miles away. I was at the beginning of that journey.
There's an interesting sort of scale here. I mean, so some of our students come to us and they're kind of all ideas, and you have to sort of go, whoa, hang on, let's you've got to validate this. Like you've got some great things, but we're going to test and we're going to validate, and we're going to drag you back into kind of user research and systems design and really immerse you in the problem so that you are in fact solving a real thing. Whereas other students are naturally a little bit more designerly, and they're kind of, oh, no, tell me, like, what can I find out? But they don't necessarily always have the radical thought or the radical drive that's going to get you to somewhere new. And you almost have to sort of expose them to a slightly scrappier process. Like, you know, in our program, we start by teaching quite a linear design thinking model. So, you know, design council's double diamond model, like, you know, work out what the problem is, you know, then solutions, and then we can think about business models and other students. And then by year 3, we go, right, what do you want to work on? And we bring in lean startup, and we go, do you have a hunch about what a good solution might look like? Okay, well, let's start from there and let's test the hell out of it. And you might find that you have to go back into the design space and use design thinking. But equally, if you've got a hunch, let's go with that for a bit and see where we get to. And we spend most of their 3rd year talking about being comfortable about being uncomfortable, and how to sort of sit in ambiguity and uncertainty and realize that all of the things that you want are on the other side of it. And all of that cloud of ambiguity and uncertainty is also the stuff that's keeping your competitors away as well. And if you're able to kind of persevere and get through that, you might find something that no one else has found yet. And that could be really, really valuable. But you've got to come to terms with the fact that you don't know what's going on, and you won't get that certainty.
I spend a lot of time teaching people kind of hypothesis testing, and I use that word, and I know it's got a slightly more scientific connotation, but in this example I'll go, what is your tight hypothesis? Go and test it, go and beat it up. And almost in design thinking world, you're reversing your logic, right? But at that point they've got something to anchor themselves on. And I think for me, when I'm working with business, I find that's a really valuable thing, because they learn all those things they didn't realize. Oh, of course the customer wants this, and you're like, how will they integrate it? Oh, okay, need to go back to the drawing board. And it's the same problem in government, actually. And it's so interesting working in government. They've got so many problems. But if you tackle it solely from a problem perspective, you get caught up in horrendous systems kind of problems. Whereas if you have a hypothesis approach with a kind of route through it, you can begin to unlock and change processes and systems and bring in new technology.
And it's that scrapyard analogy. And if you've been rooting around in the same scrapyard as everyone else who does what you do in a kind of narrow disciplinary silo, well, you're going to just come up with all the same things that everyone else comes up with. Like, you've got to have a more diverse scrapyard. You've got to be pulling things out of other places to see if they offer some radical insight or some way of doing. And that will look like lunacy to people who are rooted in a silo. You know, it's that your Henry Ford problem. You know, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd said they wanted faster horses. But actually, maybe he's seen something that is what the future looks like. And maybe that weak signal is something that needs kind of championing through. And that's where the radical, you know, really interesting disruptive stuff comes from.
Can I take us onto a slightly different topic now, about kind of a bigger macro one, building on, because we've talked about the various stages that an entrepreneur goes through, and the emotional experience and the ideation. And I know the government at the moment would love to kind of be able to support that and scale that and really understand how it exploits research that the UK is particularly good at, and we're not great at exploitation of it. Do you have views on that kind of macro position, Dave, and how we try and sponsor very capable scientists, or the kind of building off the conversation we had a little bit, I guess?
I have a very, very macro view, which is that I think you have to find a way to engineer serendipity.
Okay.
And that I mean, government likes, in some ways, to do what most investors do and back winners. So, you know, government money is often targeted at things that have already been de-risked in other ways. You know, we're going to go to certain people that we trust and have got a record, or we're going to make sure that they've already reached a certain level of traction before we put our money into the process. I honestly believe that in some ways the money needs to start earlier in the process, because there are so many people who do not identify as entrepreneurs. There are so many great ideas where whoever's developed it hasn't thought through the commercial process, and they themselves are not a commercially minded person and are not necessarily in a position to think about how that could be realized. I meet lots and lots of students and academics, people who are generating research, who could just do with a bit of capacity or a bit of funding to try a first prototype or something, and be encouraged to go, well, how could this be more valuable than I think? And there'll be quite a lot of failure, but I think we'd get some interesting hits from some more radical corners of the people who work on great ideas. Historically, most of the money in research commercialization has gone to, engineering, hard sciences, medical science. It's not gone to arts, humanities, design, social science, because they're kind of harder things to think about what the emerging products and services are. But these are also some of the subjects that are addressing the most pressing human conditions. And I think there's a missed opportunity that I'm involved in some work that is trying to sort of turn that around. But
there's value in there, isn't there? There's value that isn't being unlocked. Yeah. Can I ask? So a couple of things there. Really liked your mention of serendipity. The way I've actually read some interesting books on serendipity. There's a great one by Dr. Christian Bush, who essentially talks about connecting dots. I use it a lot, when I'm meeting new people. I'm kind of thinking, okay, how can I help you? How can, and it's creating scenarios. And when you take that to a macro level, the government try and do that. Brilliant. No, I think that's a great thing. The government has very recently, I think in the last day or two, announced a £500 million fund for entrepreneurship, and they're targeting specifically in that female-led entrepreneurs. They're setting aside a proportion of that fund for females, and that's something I know, Dave, you're interested in. I'm interested in it because actually, one of the things I do is I'm a judge at the Best Business Women Awards, which and its sole purpose is to promote and celebrate female entrepreneurship. And it's a massively untapped resource, to your point earlier. So with female-led startups, have you observed a difference in male-female attitudes, to the term entrepreneurship, to the concept?
Yeah, I have. It links back to a couple of things that we've talked about already about kind of entrepreneurial identity, and also the sort of side project entrepreneurship, as well as a sort of more amenable, accessible route in. I think entrepreneurship can look like a very exclusive club sometimes, about who's allowed in and what you should be interested in to be allowed in and what you have to have achieved to get the badge. I think we've had a really high rate of female founding come through our centre at the University of Bristol. And I think one of the secrets of why we've achieved that is that students, when they join our programs, don't have to self-identify as an entrepreneur. They tend to identify as a designer, as an innovator, as a change maker. There are a few who are absolutely identifying as would-be entrepreneurs, but actually we take in a kind of far more gender balanced cohort, and often balanced the way that you wouldn't anticipate. Often we have kind of more women in our kind of cohorts than men, but they don't all come in under that handle of entrepreneur. But over the time that they spend with us on a program, they get taught entrepreneurial tools and methods. And even if at the end they don't want to still self-identify as an entrepreneur, often because they don't want to be seen in the same bucket as Elon Musk. But if they get to the end of the program, they're like, oh no, I'm an innovator. Oh yeah, I have done a startup. Yeah, there is an entrepreneurial startup over there that's raised money and is doing incredible things. But I may yet still not entirely fully self-identified. I think one of the secrets has been, what do you call this stuff, and what do you what do people who do it call themselves? And I think there's something about the titling that...
I was going to say lexicon is such an interesting subject, because actually it does create psychological taboos when they're not necessary. And there's lots of talk around social innovation, which is social entrepreneurship in my headspace, but actually not for many people.
Yeah, not for everyone.
And I think there is a potential need for a new word that sits in this space, because there's capitalism as an entrepreneurship vehicle, and capitalism is used as a profit-making scheme, right? And then there's the whole journey, and I don't like creating new words for purpose, but I think that would help some of this.
It's a really tricky space. So I have for many years been part of a national network called Enterprise Educators UK. It's basically people who I do at universities up and down the country, and we have been arguing about what to call this for, I'm going to say, 20 odd years. And there's lots of people who will argue about the difference between what is entrepreneurship and what is enterprise. So like one version of this is, what does it mean to be enterprising? And then what does it mean to be entrepreneurial? And arguably, one of the definitions would be that kind of being enterprising is acting on your ideas, and being entrepreneurial is creating organizations that become vehicles for those ideas. That there's there's almost like a technical step. But you could argue this about, well, are they just being entrepreneurial? Yeah, probably. We've not found another word. People have offered impact. So in the academic world, we talk a lot about the idea of research impact, and that is arguably ideas that have been proven to have value. They may yet not have been commercialized entrepreneurially, but that is maybe an end point for that same process of impact. And that's what the ARC accelerator that I work for is kind of doing. It's looking at commercialization as a way of creating impacts. But equally, lots of people have a problem with the word impact, that it's either too fluffy or too ill-defined, or
second order effect sometimes as well, isn't it, to your outcomes? Yeah. So that can be the kind of challenge. You do something and the outcome is an impact rather than actually the purpose of which you're doing it. One of the ones I use a lot at the moment is adoption. So getting your ideas adopted. And I think that has a much more logical approach, a much more tangible kind of narrative to it. You're not coming up with a new idea, you're giving somebody something they're using. And
I think there's also a piece in here about, should we just detoxify the words that we do have?
Yeah.
I think that's the key, isn't it? So you mentioned fundraising there when you were talking about entrepreneurship, and I just wanted to say, look, fundraising can be a key component of creating a successful business, but it doesn't have to be, right? You can create a viable business by starting off with your own kind of money. It doesn't have to be a lot, right? Some businesses can be viable from the off. You don't have to go on a fundraising journey with seed raising, Series A, B, C, etc. And that works for many businesses. But to kind of take that all the way through, if you're aiming to be a unicorn business, there's only so many of those that are created, right? So you're going for that lottery ticket.
And you're in the lexicon language space again, because I think with some of these audiences, if you start the conversation with, you've got an idea, right? Are you thinking about seed rounds? Are we talking about investment and equity? And some people will fall away at that point. And so one of the issues with our kind of arts and social sciences academic audience is where it has not worked for them historically is that people have come in and treated them like kind of engineering commercialization, and they've sort of said, right, where's the money coming from? Who are the customers? What equity share are you having? What's the university taking? Let's talk about finance. Let's talk about intellectual property. That's not what they've been working on. They've come up with an idea that they think is valuable. They haven't been thinking about those things. So we start the conversation with, well, what does success look like for you in your career and for your idea? Like, what would good look like for this idea? Is that, you've impacted 5 people or 105 people? Is this sort of socially purposed? Do you feel like you need to own it? Or are you happy for actually the idea to be copied left, right, and centre, because it would be the way to spread it to as many people as quick as you can. You know, we do raise the question, where will the money come from? But it's not the first question that we ask. And I think that helps people get in the door, that what we're trying to do is help them make their ideas real in the world.
Yeah. You're not eating the elephant, right? Yeah, bit by bit.
Do you think there's an untapped resource of social science-based projects and opportunities out there in the UK university space? It's so interesting, and I can believe it, right? Especially with some of the problems and challenges the UK economy's got at the moment, and you know, the educational systems, the healthcare systems, all that sort of thing. You think there's and they're untapped, and there aren't easy pathways for these ideas to come out.
Well, we see a lot of these sort of socially purposed ideas operate in quite complex systems, in that the people who will benefit are probably not the people who are going to pay for it.
Yeah,
you know,
the value chain is tricky, right?
I mean, if we talk about anything that happens, say in the education sector, you know, the beneficiary might be the pupil, the user might be the teacher, the customer is probably the head of the multi-academy trust who's got to buy it, versus spending their money on all kinds of other things that they could spend on. You've got, you know, parent stakeholders. You've got quite complex. You've got, you know, governments, local authorities' role in all of that as well. You've got quite complex systems to navigate. I mean, it doesn't mean they're impossible, but you often have to work out how to play different bits of leverage off against each other. Like, when we know the parents want this, and if the parents were to moan to the school about that, then that might trigger the school into doing this, which is going to help the teacher to do that for the benefit of the pupil. Okay. So systems thinking becomes, I mean, it's the reason we teach it. It's because, you know, if you're going to do really big things, they're almost certainly buried in complex systems.
And the politics that get associated with that kind of situation.
So, Dave, I just want to pull it back to, again, the fact that you are running what sounds like an incredible accelerator program. I can see, I mean, I've presented accelerators and really enjoyed the experience, because it's full of high energy, high motivation, and people really keen to learn. I think the right program can be so beneficial to entrepreneurs. I'm obviously talking about finance and strategy, you know, so one strand of the many things that you cover. I love that you're kind of not defining one outcome for your participants. You know, success for your entrepreneurs is different, you know, based on their individual thoughts, requirements, and goals. And that's brilliant, I think. If you had to kind of boil it down to one thing, what's the biggest difference, do you think, such a program like yours can offer to individuals?
I'm going to come back to language, because in some ways, we as an accelerator are using a similar set of tools to most other accelerators. You know, there's elements of value proposition design, business model canvas, design thinking. You know, we talk about pre-mortem questions for, you know, testing what's going to kill your idea off. And again, this is also, you know, largely what I teach in my courses at the University of Bristol as well. Actually, I think that the difference is, how do you find an inclusive language that brings people into the room, helps them feel like they belong in the room, encourages them to actually engage in the tools and the methods, and not just go, oh, that's nice, Dave, yeah, thanks, but then do what they've always done anyway. It's how you take people with you on the journey. And I think that is about giving them access to the language, making it work for them. So we always there's a big slide that says commercialization equals realization. Like, if you don't like the word commercialization, what we are trying to do is make your ideas real and sustainable in the world. Like, you want to do a good thing? How do we find a mechanism that means that you're not a one-hit wonder? How do we find a mechanism that means that you are not sacrificing your time and goodwill and sanity for the sake of making that thing happen? Because that's not sustainable. Like, you can't keep that going if it's eating you alive. So actually, once you've got that kind of relationship with the people in the room, they're like, oh, you're here to help me, but not at the complete cost to myself. Right. Okay, then maybe I can get on board. And then you're helping people kind of work their way through the tools. And, a friend of mine, I was chatting to another guy who works in acceleration a couple of nights ago. And I was talking about fast failure. And we introduce all of our participants to the idea of fast failure. And I always say, how do you feel about fast failure? And then I go, well, how do you feel about slow and expensive failure? And it's like, oh, okay, no, I don't want that. But he repackages it as speed to learning. And he finds that for his audience, speed to learning is a really kind of powerful phrase, that they're interested in the sort of the efficiency of the thing. And so, language.
I love the phrase speed to learning, and I do it when I'm telling organizations to do hypothesis testing of their idea or their problem or whatever they're approaching things with. I'll say this is about rapid learning. You can kill this project at any point. You'll just learn really fast, and off the back of it, you'll know what to do next, and whatever happens, you'll make a better decision. And I think teaching people that means it's not an investment lost. There's something psychological about the investment lost of risk taking. Whereas I think if you can drive that towards learning outcomes and improve decision making, that works in big businesses, small businesses, and startups.
So we talk about affordable loss. So
yeah,
I don't know if you encountered effectual logic as a sort of body of work, but one of the principles of kind of effectual logic is, well, what can you afford to lose in the process of gaining something?
Yeah,
and it's kind of, oh, okay, well, I'm prepared to risk this and that and that. Okay, right, well, let's start there then. But let's
and you start to tackle the world Romesh would shout at you and I about, Dave, in terms of ROI in that world, because you are starting to think about where the outcomes still have benefits to the organization above and beyond just, here's some money, go and break something and see what happens. No. Go and break it sensibly, understand what you learn, and there will be benefits off the back of it that you can probably qualify and quantify.
That's the key, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. There's the finance director finish.
But that's important because actually we have to help our students who often have really idealistic kind of like, oh, we should be doing this, and it's partly like, where does the money come from? Who's going to believe you? Like, I mean, one of the challenges that we always end up coming up against is the students will have devised something amazing, and then we have to go, is that company that you're trying to sell to going to believe that 3 21-year-olds can deliver this? And that's often that's a hard, and do we need to parachute a 40-year-old somewhere into your midst to give you the sort of credibility to talk to certain organizations? Or is there something that we can do with your product that means it speaks for itself to an audience who are looking for a greater level of credibility? There's some really interesting kind of challenges and trade-offs in there.
I love the realization word, and I still stick with adoption, but actually that logic of giving somebody something to use, if you can get that company to use it and feel like they've enjoyed it, it might only be a micro part of your overall idea, but that is immensely rewarding as a founder. And it will lead you to a much better place later. And I think having a real positive desire for somebody to use your thing for purpose, then that's great.
And it's a foot in the door. So if we go back to our system, once a company have seen one bit of what you do and have trusted you to do that, well, actually,
you'll move.
You can push the foot in a bit further, and then they might trust you to do other things. So again, it's helping students not just go, well, let's do this. It's go, well, maybe we need to do that as a means to get to do that.
Absolutely, especially in a systems-led complex environment. Really good. Thank you very much for your time today, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on this version of Strive and Thrive. Romesh, have you got anything you'd like to summarize?
I just wanted to say thank you as well. What a fascinating discussion, Dave. I love your enthusiasm and energy and real passion for the subject, and you're doing great things. Sounds like a brilliant accelerator program at Bristol University. So well done, and keep going, and really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insights with us today.
Thank you, gents. It's been great fun.
Yeah, right.
I want to learn more about your mythology in due course as well.
Yeah, I feel we could do one alone. Yeah, we'll do another episode on mythology. I need to go back to school first, Dave, before we do that one. So firstly, thank you very much for everyone listening or watching this show. And I hope you've enjoyed the discussion with Dave. Thank you very much, Dave. Really great to have you on the show. So Strive and Thrive is our regular series of discussions for entrepreneurs and business leaders. And we've got loads of interesting guests planned for the next actually 6 months now we're out to, so which is great. Our next session will be announced on LinkedIn in the next few weeks. Please reach out to us on social media if you're interested. Register on our relevant podcasts that you use. Are across all platforms nowadays. And I just want to say thank you very much to Romesh for joining me. Thank you, Dave, and thank you to the Strive and Thrive team behind the scenes, particularly Rose Sharon, who introduced me to Dave and has been on the journey with me and Dave for quite a while now. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Strive and Thrive.